In this lesson, we'll take a look at the message box method, which is used to display a pop-up box with a message in the Excel interface. This is really helpful for a couple of reasons. The first one is that we can use it very similarly to debug.print to see the value of something like a variable over the course of our procedure execution. The other cool thing is that we can actually use it to alert the user of some kind of message. Debug print is only available to us in the immediate window as a VBA developer in our actual editor. But with the message box, we can give the user a message that they can see in the Excel interface itself. Let's begin this lesson by practicing message box a couple of times in our immediate window, and then we'll write the exact same code within an actual procedure body. So right here in the immediate window, I'm going to type the word message box. It's a little bit abbreviated. It's actually going to be capital Msg, capital Box, message box. And as soon as I click space here, we're going to see a little box pop up, a yellow box that's going to offer us a little bit of help in completing the method definition. So let's go into this in a bit more detail. Here we see the yellow box. This is our first introduction to the concept of parameters and arguments to methods. So methods, much like Excel functions in our Excel program, can take inputs. An input helps modify how the function or method is going to perform. For example, in Excel, we have a basic function like sum, but sum by itself can't do anything. It needs to know the values that it's actually going to add together. Well, this is very similar here in VBA. Visual Basic includes this thing called the message box, which is used to output text in a box to the user. But it has no clue what we actually want to output, the actual content of the text itself. We have to tell that method what to do in that sense. The way we do it is by giving the method inputs. Now those inputs, we use the terms parameter and argument interchangeably most of the time, but there is a difference between them. Right here, we see in this yellow box the name of all of the parameters that the message box method expects. Some of them are optional and some of them are mandatory. They're listed here in the order they have to be given to the method. So you can see here the very first parameter, or the very first name that we've given to an expected input, is prompt. And prompt represents the actual text or expression that we want to evaluate and output with the message box. So when I type something in here, let's say I'm just going to output the message hello. Notice that it's a string, so I have to wrap it in double quotes. Hello, or the input that we want to provide to the prompt parameter, is what we call the argument. So the parameter is the name of the input, and the argument is the actual value that we give whenever we invoke the method. So prompt, again, is the parameter, and hello in this case is the argument that we provide for the prompt parameter. And another word for any of these two words, again, is input. Hello is an input that we're giving to the built-in message box method so that it knows what to output. In this case, the other things that we see right here are all optional. They don't need to be included. So when we execute this code, this should work just fine. When I press enter right here, we're going to see this box pop up. I have it appear a little bit in the middle because I'm splitting my view between Excel and the Visual Basic Editor. But if the regular user has just Excel open, this box will appear right in the center of their Excel interface. We can see hello is listed here, the exact same message we typed out here, minus, of course, the double quotes. And we have this OK button. Once they click that, then it goes back to the same old, same old. Now keep in mind, if we use the message box within the body of a procedure, it's going to temporarily halt or pause the remainder of the procedure. So the procedure is kind of going to wait until the user confirms with the OK button, and then it's going to continue executing the remaining code that's still left in the procedure. So the message box does pause, so which kind of acts as a little bit of a deterrent to continue processing things. So it's not something that you want to use over and over and over again. But if you want the user to do something like click OK to make sure they're aware that something is going on, it can be a pretty particular tool that you can use to sort of give the user some awareness about what's going on. Let's go ahead and use message box a couple more times. So I'm going to remove all my code right here. Let's take a look as well at the yellow helper box that's appearing when we start typing. So message box, and there we go, it pops up again. So we can see here the names of all of our parameters. They're separated by a comma, and the one that's currently being entered, the one that's active, the one that we're providing a value for, is going to be highlighted in a slightly more bold, blacker font. So we can see here prompt is highlighted, which means that's the input or parameter that VBA is expecting us to provide an argument for now. So if we do something like goodbye this time, and we put a comma, just like we see here in the yellow pop-up box, the bold highlighted section will change because now VBA is expecting an input or argument to that second parameter, to that second input. Let me just erase this comma because we don't need it. Now we go back to prompt. So reading here from left to right, we can see our parameters are prompt, buttons, then we move on to title, help file, context, and then finally that as is not actually a parameter, it's just describing what is going to be the return value of this method, which we don't have to worry about for now. A couple things that I want to point out here. Notice that buttons, title, help file, and context are surrounded in square brackets. Those square brackets are a visual indicator that that parameter or argument is optional. It's not needed. You can provide it to help modify how the method is going to work, but it's not required for the method to function. In comparison, prompt does not include a pair of square brackets, which means it's mandatory. You have to put it in there or it's not going to work. Of course, and that makes sense because how can you output some kind of text in a message box if you don't tell message box what that text is going to be? So prompt is the only required argument here. Let's go ahead and give this a shot. Once again, I'm going to press enter, execute this. There is our message box. It pops up. Notice it says Microsoft Excel at the top. That's just the standard title. Here is our message goodbye. And here we have the OK button. Click OK, back to normal. I want to take a little bit of time here to introduce you to a special symbol that we can use when working with strings, and it's called the concatenation symbol, and it's actually the ampersand sign, which you can access by pressing Shift-7 on your keyboard. So what the ampersand symbol does is it concatenates or combines two strings together. So for example, if I want to output a string that's going to be, let's say, my first name and my last name, I can do my first name, and then I'm going to do a space just to make sure that there's a space after my name. Then I'm going to put an ampersand, that's this symbol, again, Shift-7. And right here in another string, I'm going to do my last name. So what this is going to do is it's going to combine this string on the left before the ampersand symbol with the string on the right, my first name, a space, combined with my last name, put them all together as a common string, evaluate that expression, and that's what we're going to see in our message box. So when I execute this, there we go, the full name appears. Let's go ahead and click out of this box. Now you may be wondering, of course, what's the purpose of this? I could have just entered this as a single string, and you're absolutely correct. But sometimes we need to combine something like a user input with our own custom string. And with the user input, we're not going to know exactly what that's going to be. So we may need to use a symbol like this in order to combine things like that. Whenever one string is unexpected and the other one is actually predetermined, a symbol like the concatenation operator will come in handy. Let's go ahead and use message box now in the actual body of a VBA procedure. I'm going to remove this code in our immediate window. Once again, we have to create a module to store our procedure. Right-click on Microsoft Excel Objects, insert a module. We can leave the default name of module 1 for now. And let's just create a method here. I'm just going to say show boxes, give it a name of that. Parentheses, VBA is going to fill in the n sub at the end. And let's tab in a little bit here just so we have our body indented. That's a good practice, just so we have a visual indicator that this is the heart or content of our procedure. And let's do message box a couple times in order actually, so we can see all of these boxes appear in sequence. So once again, message box. When we press space, we're once again going to see that yellow prompt. By the way, should have mentioned this earlier, but the yellow box here is popping up because of an option that we enabled in our Excel options a little bit earlier, a couple lessons ago. If you followed all of the configuration instructions there, you should be seeing this. If not, you should go back to that video. It's in the very first pane within our Excel options box that we enabled this feature, which can be really helpful to us as a developer because we have a good reminder of what parameters the method is expecting. So let's do a couple things here. Let's output a message box with a string of hello there. So far we've been sticking with strings, but we can do basically any kind of data type. So let's output a number here. Let's just output the number 2. Right below, let's once again do message box, Msg Box. This time, let's do a calculation of numbers. So let's do 3 plus 5. This is very similar to what we just did in the immediate window with the concatenation operator. VBA will first evaluate the expression. In the previous example, it's going to evaluate the concatenation of strings. In this case, it's going to evaluate the numeric arithmetic calculation. Once it's done with that, that's what it's actually going to output. So the message box here will have the value 8. And finally, let's go ahead and put a value here in range A1 just to show you that we can use the message box to output a range value. Let's say I'm going to put a string in here. Let's just call it fun. and right here in my Visual Basic Editor, message box, and how do we reference range A1? We use the range keyword, open up our parentheses, reference the actual cell or range that we want to access, and then access the property value on the range object, and that's going to access the value fun and output it in a message box. So let's go ahead and click in here. We're going to execute this procedure. We're going to see 4 total message boxes appear. Number 1, hello there. Number 2, perfect naming. Let's click OK here. Message box 8, that's the sum of 3 and 5. And finally, a message box with the value fun, which is exactly what we see in cell A1. I want to conclude this lesson by tying a lot of these concepts together. I mentioned at the beginning that message box is a method, but a method on what? We know that methods exist on actual objects, but we don't have any actual object listed here. As it turns out, message box is actually a method on an object called VBA. It's a little bit confusing, I know, because VBA is also the name of the programming language that we're actually learning here. But within the context of our Visual Basic Editor, we have an object also called VBA. Just like we saw an object called debug a lesson or two ago, just like we have an object called worksheet and workbook, we have an actual object called VBA, and the message box method is a method that is attached to that VBA object. So what I can go ahead and do here is just write VBA dot message box. And I'm going to do that for all of these just so you see that it's going to do the exact same thing when we execute. So as you might guess, the reason we don't explicitly need to write VBA in front of message box is because Excel and VBA is smart enough to figure out that that's what you mean. It knows what message box is. The exact same way that it assumes when you're using range that you're referring to the active workbook and the active spreadsheet. The exact same way here, if you use message box, Excel assumes that, well, hey, I have this VBA object in the background. I know that it has a method called message box. That must be what you're using. But if you want to use explicit references like this, you're more than welcome to if that helps you get a little bit more clarity. This message box method, again, is just a regular method on a built-in object called VBA. So when I execute or run this procedure right here, again with that green play button, here's my first one, second one, third one, and my range A1 value of fun. The VBA object stores a lot of what we call utility functions. A utility function is one that helps the programmer be more efficient. So in addition to things like message box, the VBA object includes functions that help with time and date, mathematical operations like absolute value, even text functions like extracting characters from the left side of a string or the right side of a string. These methods are all bundled together within the VBA object, and it's mostly used by us developers to kind of help us write our code a little bit more efficiently, to have utility or speed or efficiency when it comes to writing our code. We're going to dive into the VBA object in greater detail a little bit later in the course, but that's all there is to cover in this lesson. We talked about message box, which is a method on the VBA object. It outputs some kind of value to a box that the user can see in their interface. The input that we give it, we call that an argument. An argument is given to the concept of a parameter, which is just a name for an expected input. In this case, our message box method has a parameter called prompt, and we're giving that prompt parameter various arguments. Here we're giving it, for example, the arguments hello there, 2, 3 plus 5, etc. It evaluates that input in order to customize how the message box is going to perform, and then just outputs that value for us to see or for the user who's running the procedure to confirm. That's all there is to cover here, and I'll see you in the next lesson.